we don't fear sharks or terrorists or criminals. What we actually fear is the unknown. So the answer to that is the more you learn about something, the less scary it'll be.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why? Hi everyone, I'm Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today I'm here with Efren Delgado. Efren's a former FBI special agent with 25 years of national security, law enforcement, and private protection experience. He is also a lifelong student of human behavior. I know we're going to get into a lot of that. I'm super excited for this conversation. But first, I just want to start by saying thank you, Efren. Thank you for taking the time out to be here today.
Absolutely, Jason. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, why don't we just start with your background? I'm sure hearing you're an FBI agent is going to be pique a lot of people's interest, mine included. So I'd just love to hear that story about kind of your life.
Yeah, I guess I could backtrack to what motivated me to protect people. And that was just, I started out the book with describing myself smaller than all the other kids when I entered second grade, because I entered 1 year early. So preschool, kindergarten, first grade was fine. But then you start to notice little differences in 1 year. It makes a huge difference for kids. Yeah. So naturally, as I discovered throughout my life, but not then as a kid, bullies target weaklings or easy targets, who they perceive as weak. So I was bullied a little bit as being a nice, sweet, naive, skinny little kid, and those kids were bigger. And when I was bullied there, I remember asking, why would somebody be mean when they could simply be nice? If you think about that, fundamental child's question is a fundamental essence of psychology, and more specifically, criminology. So I was interested in psychology and criminology as a kid. I just didn't know they were called those things. And you studied human behavior. I learned later at 12 years old that it's a whole field studying human behavior called psychology. Yeah. So that piqued my interest looking back into protecting people. So throughout my schooling, university, I kind of knew I was interested in human behavior. I was interested in protecting people because of that seed that was planted when I was 6, 7 years old. I thought the FBI was the best entity to implement that purpose. So I used the FBI like they used me as a tool so they could get their stats, and I used them to help protect people. I did that in the National Security Division for the first half of my FBI career. That was in Washington, D.C., chasing around spies and terrorists and combating espionage. A lot of fun stuff, to be honest with you. And then that evolved to the more traditional criminal division of the FBI as an agent, where I was assigned to a less traditional violation, civil rights. So that was hate crimes, human trafficking, and color of law, or investigating bad cops. And just to get it out of the way, most cops I investigated, I exonerated about 98, 99% of the accusations as being false accusations. But when they were guilty, they were really guilty. So what I looked for in that specific violation was a systemic pattern of criminal behavior, not accidents and not rumors or just bitter people have been arrested or offended. So real criminality. And the interesting aspect of that is all the good cops kind of knew who the bad ones were. They just kind of avoided those rotten apples and they did their own thing. So that was an interesting dynamic that came up. And after I left the FBI in 2015, I joined the private sector in what I call the trifecta of protecting people: national security, criminal, law enforcement, to bodyguard work or threat assessment. So I've been doing threat assessments and bodyguard work since 2015. And now every 7, 8 years or so, I'm ready for another change. And I wrote this book. So now I'm trying to protect people by educating them and, pulling back the curtain of the Wizard of Oz, just so they see that bad guys are just withered old men that are putting on a big performance with smoke and mirrors. Or the other metaphor I often use is chihuahuas barking at the doorbell. They're not barking because they're brave and strong. They're barking because they're scared. They're scared of whatever's on the other side is gonna see their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. That's the essence of villainy. It's envy and jealous of the good guys for being brave enough to risk being vulnerable, kind, and thoughtful.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one thing you said really kind of right off the bat from your childhood that struck me, um, why would someone be a bully when they could be kind? And I
Right.
think, we'll talk more about it. I think I'm sure there's a lot of insight in it throughout your book, but I mean, I think you just kind of summed up at its essence. Usually, in general, sort of bad behavior comes from a learned history of bad behavior, whether that's, bullies were bullied or, something, bad home life. Same thing with, I think a lot of sexual predators were the prey, if you will, as a
Mm-hmm.
young, in their young lives. And so it's really interesting and sad, just kind of how that all ties together. And so I'm sure your experiences, you probably do see, the worst of the worst. And you said,
Yeah.
in your investigation of police officers that the bad that were genuinely bad were quite so taking that, taking those feelings you developed in your childhood of being bullied and then sort of finding your way into the FBI. What about talk a little bit about that journey, kind of in the early stages, because obviously you talked
Yeah.
about that evolution, but what was that like for you kind of in the beginning, transitioning from someone who had been bullied to wanting to be that protector?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. If you'll let me, I just want to backtrack a little bit. People often assume that people who have been molested or sexually abused become abusers, and it looks like the majority do not. They do not become abusers, but those who are abusers were often abused.
Right.
So it's
Right.
not both ways; it's just one way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to kind of correct that line of thinking for your audience. Um, and so, as a kid, frankly, when you're a kid, you're by definition naive. You're unaware of the world. That's why you're afraid of the dark, because you don't know what's in the dark. As an adult, you're less afraid of the dark because you know there's a couch there, there's a closet there, and it's filled with a bunch of clothes and a typewriter or whatever. You know. So um, that's one of the main concepts I'm always encouraging my reader and audiences like yours is we don't fear sharks or terrorists or criminals. What we actually fear is the unknown. So the answer to that is the more you learn about something, the less scary it'll be. So to bring it back to my childhood and those experiences, I didn't know a lot. I was a kid. So having to face these bullies, when I'm surrounded by the majority of nice kids and nice teachers, I, I didn't know how to handle those bullies. And frankly, I didn't get a lot of guidance on how to handle them. That would have been helpful, but my parents were just doing their best. So I had to assess it on my own from a child's mind. So I ended up, unrelated to the bullying, but I ended up repeating the second grade at a new school because of my age. So the teachers, and I put this in the book, my teachers and my parents thought it was for the best. And I interpreted that again from a child's mind as I'm stupid.
Yeah.
So again, all this humility and being humbled as a kid who just wants people to be nice. So that innocence, in some ways, was hurtful. And I'm going to allude to something later for your audience. I think it's great to be innocent, but there's a flip side that I'm going to get to later. So when I went to the new school, I'm going there cynical, pessimistic, assuming life will be like this, just being bullied, picked on for being a nice, skinny kid. I have naturally a sense of humor, and I remember this was the new second grade at the new school, and I remember I think a kid fell back and was leaning back in his seat, and he fell backwards, and I cracked a joke. I don't remember what the joke was. Gosh, I wish I did because it made the whole room laugh, including the teacher. And after that, that was kind of my inciting incident to like change my mindset. Everybody was, everybody likes a funny guy. So I grew from that, became kind of popular, became friendly. People were friendly. It was a great school. The bullies were insignificant. And I just made a vow then to use that power that I acquired. I wasn't using this adult lexicon, but that's how I'm looking back on it. I remember using that power and devoting it, making a promise to myself to not abuse it and to protect people with that social power I had. I still wasn't the biggest guy in school, but I had power of the social power. And so I just kept that for the rest of my life. And even though, as a kid, you have these stumbles and you're not always making the best decisions, but my overarching purpose, my North Star, my summit on the mountain was protect people as best you can and navigate those obstacles along the way. But again, like the more experience you get just by growing up, the less scary things are because the more you understand them.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I 100% agree with that. I think, understanding comes to, and this is, I mean, generally we talk a lot about real estate and entrepreneurship and business on this podcast, and it's interesting. Even the correlation there is that the people that are driven by kind of the fear of and the fear and lack of understanding in investing or business or whatever, it holds them back. And so
Yeah.
I think it's that principle really just applies to everything, right? If we're afraid of it, and that's in general how our body is wired, is it's wired for, survival, not success. And so, you have that fight or flight reflex. But I think developing understanding allows you to get to that fight side, or the, if you will, just to stay away from the fear.
Yeah. And fear is a tool.
Right.
So when you have that fear of heights, that's protecting you from getting too close to the edge of a cliff.
Right.
And regardless of how adorable that baby cub bear is, your fear of the mother is there for a reason. If we didn't have fear, you would go pet that adorable cub and get your head bitten off, by mommy bear.
Yeah.
So it's still a tool, but it becomes, in psychology, people always think of they either have this disorder or that disorder, but in reality, everything's on a continuum. So the way professional therapists, anyway, the way professional therapists manage that is the degree that interferes with your quote unquote normal life. If you're able to function to whatever degree with something, you just kind of manage it. If it's to a greater degree, maybe you need additional treatment, medical treatment, increased therapy, whatever. So fear is the same way. You don't want fear to be disabling, so you never propose or pitch your business idea, which could be fantastic, or you never have the nerve to stand up in front of the group and present, educate them on something because you're afraid of public speaking. When it starts to interfere with your progress, that's when you have to really dive in. But disease is the same way, like poisons. Everything's the same way. Cyanide, to a really, really, really tiny degree, is not poisonous, but it's one of those compounds that it doesn't take much to kill you. But at the same time, the opposite end of that spectrum, water does not seem poisonous, but if you drink enough of it, it will kill you. Plain water. So it's all a question of degree. So context and continuum are fundamental concepts in my book that I present in the very beginning, just so that the reader understands these dynamics.
Yeah. And the book is called, just for folks, we'll have this stuff in the show notes, but the book is called The Opposite is True. Where does that title come from?
So I noticed throughout my childhood and career and life, frankly, that most truths are counterintuitive and paradoxical to some degree. So in order to earn understanding reality, you have to put in a little bit of effort. Now, I know that sounds really abstract, so I'll give you an example. When somebody makes themselves vulnerable, they're actually displaying strength, even though it looks like they're being humble or meek or kind, appears to be like a kind little, innocent rabbit. But really, that's strength because they're brave enough to be generous, to be vulnerable, to be open. And the opposite is true. Criminals cannot do that. They're so weak or frightened inside that they have to present this loud picture so nobody dare look into them. That's the whole Chihuahua barking at the doorbell thing. So if you're noticed in your life experience or in your audience's life experience, think of all the really obnoxious, loud people, even if they're not criminals or bullies, but they're really obnoxiously loud. You could imagine, just growing up in a bar and growing up and going to bars in college or whatever, there's always that guy looking to pick a fight after he had a couple of drinks. That is not exhibiting strength. That's exhibiting weakness. And think of all the competent, really kind people in your lives, whether it's family, coworkers, friends, whatever. They could handle themselves, whether it's intellectually, physically, or whatever. They're kind because they have nothing to prove. So the opposite is true. And we literally tear muscle when we work out for increased strength. So you have to tear it before you get stronger. Success is another example. And an uncommonly thought of prerequisite for success is counterintuitive, and that is failure. Failure is a prerequisite for success. And everybody right now is thinking of all the times they failed and almost given up. But the only time you actually give up, I say, is when you fail is when you give up. Otherwise, persist until you succeed. So it's all these dynamics that kind of mash together where the truth is counterintuitive. So I say the opposite is true.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love that concept. And I think that, that the piece about we've got to go through pain, discomfort, failures to achieve, something big on the other side. And it's, you could think really, if you start to go down that rabbit hole, it can apply to like all of life. And yeah, I fully agree with, you haven't failed unless you quit. And it's, there's a Michael Jordan quote that I love. And he says, I never lost a game. I just ran out of time. And it's
I love that.
one of those things that it's like, if you really think about that, like in a life context, right? Like the reason why games have, like sports have time constraints is because at some point it's going to flip, right? Like it's, if you let certain games go on forever, you'd never have a winner because it's just going to keep going back and forth.
Yeah.
And so, we want finite, we want an answer like, I don't know, this may be just a me thing, but I hate ties, right? Like I hate like the idea of a game not having a winner when you're watching sports, ties. It just really, and
you don't like loose ends,
right? It's like, nobody won then. Like, what good was that? But I think it's, if you contrast that to life is that game that doesn't have a time or an ending. And so there are going to be times where you lose and you win, and you lose. It's going to go back and forth. And you just have to take those pieces and kind of roll with it and learn from them. And so it's just all the philosophy that goes along with this is so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I would imagine, you talked about kind of the background as a child and how some of these topics started to come up. And obviously as a child, we can't necessarily verbalize, rationalize all of it. But then as you moved through your career, I would guess you started to notice things, develop your theories, and then apply it to what you were doing.
Yeah.
How did you tell me a little bit about that evolution? I mean, at the end of the day, it came out in a book, so that's great. Now other people can benefit from those experiences, but I would imagine there were some, as we talked about, ups and downs, you learning lessons, things like that.
Well, I started noticing these patterns. I remember them pretty well in elementary school, and so I would question them, but not to get off on another rabbit hole. But you see the way our schools are designed, like stay in line, sit in a seat, follow the leader, do what they say, don't question. I've always had this rebellious bone in me that I just hate that setup. So I'm always thinking, but they don't, I say they, meaning the powers that be, don't want the proletariat or the students to think. They just want compliance. And that's always rubbed me the wrong way. It's a form of bullying or oppression. So I've always questioned things, but as a little kid with a little bit of power, I was told even by my parents, just listen to your teachers, listen to the principal. And I remember thinking, well, what if they're wrong? Because adults can be wrong. But I complied, trying to be a good kid, maybe stubbornly, but I did eventually comply just as a kid. But then looking back, like in high school and college, looking back on my elementary school days, I realized, hey, I was right. The teacher was wrong on the couple of incidents I'm thinking of. So I'm trying to encourage my kid, even though he has to learn the rules and how to stay in the lane, but to always think and to question, even if you don't implement, just to question things, and you're allowed to think. Um, and for your audience and for people in general, thinking is the only antidote to oppression. So the second you stop thinking, you're giving up your freedoms to the oppressor. And so that's even questioning media, questioning laws, questioning rules, or questioning cultural status quos. But questioning is the only antidote to not becoming a mental slave. Um, yeah, I think I beat around the bush a little bit too much.
No, no, that's fine. And I think I'm my question, I guess, specifically is,
Uh-huh.
how did you implement some of these
Oh,
philosophies,
right,
the teaching that, within your career path?
right. So throughout childhood, I saw those patterns and I saw them play themselves out, where only the mean people were the ones with all these problems, and the kind people were the ones who tended to be more competent. So when I uh, when I continued throughout similar experiences in elementary school and college and just life in general, I had a good understanding of what made the bad guys bad and what made the good guys good. What I did not expect is once I did join the FBI in the National Security Division and later in the Criminal Division, and even now in the private sector, as they call it, executive protection, I see that the most competent agents and police officers and bodyguards are the kindest people. They're just kind. And because of that, they're very competent. They've got nothing to prove. And the other ones are often just won't shut up about their backgrounds and who they are. And they're always kind of paying too much attention to you and looking at you, trying to analyze you. I could hear their thoughts. That's a beautiful thing about, if I can say it, about reading my book, is you'll start to become semi-psychic because you understand what people's motives are. Why is that colleague staring at you too much instead of doing their job? And it's because they're incompetent and envious of your productivity. So they may pretend or feign to be allies, but behind your back, they're trying to hurt you so that they look better for 2 minutes. And the wisest supervisors understand that dynamics, but frankly, most of them are oblivious. So at the end of the day, I suggest, just like I did in my career, keep your eye on the ball, focus on your North Star, what your purpose is, and as much as is possible, let those distractions and the naysayers, or I call them negative Nancy's, just try to navigate around them and don't let them get in your way too much. You can't ignore them because you do have to manage them and play the manipulation game, but take it in stride and don't let them pull you off course, because that is their goal, to pull you off your course.
Yeah. Were you, this is going to be a little bit embarrassing of a question, I think, because I'm realizing that most of what I know about sort of getting into the FBI and being a part of that is probably from TV and movies. And so this may be a stupid question, but
That's okay.
there is an academy of sorts,
Yeah.
like training to, and so do they, I guess my question is, in refer to FBI or just any of the, you know, protection type services. There's, I assume some of this stuff is taught in some way, like trying to,
Yeah.
kind of
Generally.
the analysis of criminology and things like that.
Yeah. The FBI has their academy in Quantico, Virginia. It's in Northern Virginia. and it's on a military base. It's the Quantico military base. So you enter the Marine base, and then in the center of that, roughly in the center of that, you enter another security guard and everything, and that's the FBI Academy. In there, it's like any academy you'd imagine. In fact, they filmed there for, I don't know if you ever saw Silence of the Lambs with Jodie Foster.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In the beginning of that movie, that's actually filmed there, and you see little glimpses of Hogan's Alley, and there's, I remember one of her running trails, hung on the tree is this sign that says something like pain, agony, love it. So it's just kind of motivating you for physical, mental, psychological. And then the tactical training is done in Hogan's Alley, which is like a mock city. So they'll have like fake banks, fake businesses, fake whatever. So we could practice different scenarios. And we use simunitions like they're like bullets but with paint. So they still hurt like a bitch, but they don't kill you. You still wear face masks because if you get hit in the neck or in your eye, it could be lethal. But the point is, we learn a lot of this stuff. My interpretation of a lot of these behavioral patterns are not the traditional, I guess, theories out there. I incorporate a lot of the traditional theories from behavioralists or psychoanalysts or whatever the latest psychobabble thing is. But just like the martial arts, I appreciate that Bruce Lee did, which is more of a philosophy, Jeet Kune Do. He incorporates parts of Western boxing, Chinese Wing Chun, which is more centerline, or kickboxing or Muay Thai, which is more coming from the outside. He takes all the parts of all these different types of fighting styles and he scrapes off all the kata, all the stuff that is irrelevant or impractical at the given context, and he uses what we in JKD call the truths that are hidden in there. And most things, most cultures, most fighting styles, most whatever, even cooking, has their fundamental truths in there. And a lot of the other stuff is frivolous or irrelevant or wrong. So if a Muay Thai guy was approaching Bruce Lee, he would probably focus on the center line and not play his game. He would attack him this way. When the opponent's attacks are coming from the outside, he's going center line. So the way I view the psychological concepts is I just scrape off all the psychobabble, all the irrelevant things, and I just focus on what's the most pragmatic, the most practical, what's really happening. Even if you don't have degrees in psychology or human behavior or whatever, you could understand what your relatives are really after, the good or the bad, what your friends and quote unquote friends or what your real friends are really all about. You could understand people's true motivations, not their presented motivations. And with that, you could interact with them more efficiently. You could either pretend to not understand what their true motives are and feign compliance so that you just appease them so you can move on, or you check them. Like another comparison to Jeet Kune Do, when somebody's running at you full force, Bruce Lee had a move called Jeet Tech where he would just put a straight leg out there with a locked knee and just stop them so that they fall over with their overcommitment. So it keeps the range, but they overcommitted and he recognized that. So they pretty much hurt themselves. That's the beauty of JKD. You're using their offense against them. And it's so Jeet Kune Do is the way of the intercepting fist. So if somebody's punching you, you either destroy it or you intercept it with a hit. So you're allowing your opponent to hurt themselves. And so in psychology, you have to, if you have an enemy or somebody who's against you, allow them to hurt themselves by understanding and anticipating what they're truly after, even though they think they're smarter than everybody. So a good example of that is a negative Nancy in the office who you pretend to not notice that they're always trying to stab you in the back, but while they're acting like your friend, just let them think you're friends, but just don't let your guard down when you're around that individual. That's just a basic everyday kind of example. And a more serious example would be in the world of terrorism, espionage, or criminality. if you let a criminal try to manipulate you, and you're just in denial, hoping the best in people, the second he puts his hand in his pocket, he could pull out a tiny pistol and kill you, and suddenly your wife's a widow and your kids don't have a father. So when people are always second guessing lethal force with police, Monday, what do they call it?
Monday morning quarterback.
Monday morning quarterbacking. Yeah. When they're doing that, they're not considering the context, because a lot of that context is inconvenient and uncomfortable. So I suggest that living in reality means becoming comfortable with what's uncomfortable for the sake of your North Star, of your purpose. Always be motivated by what Jason's life purpose is and your audience members' life purposes, because there's tons of people who are going to try to pull you off that wall, off that mountain, and it's just not worth it. Your purpose is way too important. That's what I contend.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue to. I always ask every guest, a handful of questions, and the first one is always related to the name of the show being Know Your Why. So I think that's kind of a little bit of what you're getting at here is, your purpose, your North Star. But Efren, I wanted to ask you, what is your why? What drives you? You had really an interesting career, and I think a lot for people to kind of gain in sort of knowledge and understanding from this interview, but also, getting your book and kind of diving in even deeper. But what's your why? What's pushing you forward?
I think ever since that seed was planted when I was a little kid, I really resent injustice, and I don't expect to ever live in a utopia. As a flawed Christian, I know utopia is only in heaven, and after people choose, to follow God in spite of their flaws. But this planet is unjust, and accepting that fact could at least allow you to have some sense of peace, and just like the Serenity Prayer, and know what you can change and know what you can't, and don't waste too much time on what you can't change. Just do your part, and that will give you peace. So my why in general is resentment and frustration of those injustices. And the biggest injustice I see is when innocent and kind people are taken advantage of by powerful, dark people. Even though those chihuahuas barking at the doorbell are merely chihuahuas, they're weak inside. They have a lot of power, because that bark and that loud presentation oftentimes works, more often than not. That's why it's so useful. That's why in the animal kingdom, they do it. They fluff up their feathers.
Yeah.
They stand tall with their fur. Every single animal does it. And humans are animals too. So we do it maybe more in a more complicated way with emotions and words and that sort of thing. But the louder something is, when the context doesn't support that loudness, then the opposite is true. So your audience now already can predict the weak people in their lives when they're always kind of attacking them for no reason, when the context isn't appropriate. So at that Thanksgiving dinner, when you're being over criticized on how dry the turkey is, maybe your mother-in-law or whatever has a bigger issue that has nothing to do with the turkey.
Yeah.
So it could be as simple and as benign as that. But in the dark criminal world, which is my why, I mean, there's nothing worse. I can think of a lot of bad things, but a kid being molested is probably the worst thing I could think of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like in the realm of like murdering innocent people and that sort of thing. But a kid being molested, it's probably the most evil thing. So I remember vowing, even as a kid, to just combat evil as best as I can my whole life. And so some of the dynamics that I was talking about, were the innocent people are being taken advantage of by the criminals. When you're overly innocent, and I'm going to make that full segue that I referred to in the beginning, when you're overly innocent, you're naive. And when you're scared to face the ugly realities out there, you're in denial by definition. You are not acknowledging that terrorists want to kill you, even though on videotape they're telling you they want to kill you. You're still in denial about that. That's an emotional position. So you won't be able to defend yourself when you're denying that. And nobody loves that position more than the criminals. and the bullies and the tyrants and the pedophiles, the fraudsters, all those terrible people, the evil people in the world, love it when people are in denial about their existence. So the opposite is true. The more you become aware of all the evils in the world, the less scary they will be because you'll know more about them, you'll understand them, and you'll become, ironically, less of a target because you'll stand taller. You'll be aware of it. You'll be cognizant of the whack-a-mole in the room, what stands out from the norm. I use this example in other podcasts, but if you're at a Taylor Swift concert and you see this, everybody's a Swiftie, but you see some dude in camouflage and a black backpack with a shaved head, like that stands out, So pay attention to that. Don't be in denial about it. Everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. Next thing you know, bombs going off or something. That's the bodyguard world. That's how we kind of look at things. We look for whack-a-mole. But your audience can do the same thing. And when you understand these things, you can protect your kids by encouraging them to stand tall, be friendly to kids, get involved, be active, be confident, so they'll be less of a target. The pedophiles are going to look for the little kid alone, kicking rocks, who's sad about something. Yep. They're an easier target. The same is true with fraudsters. They're not looking for Wall Street gurus to try to swindle out of their money. That's too much of a challenge. They're going to call senile people and try to rob them of their savings, manipulate them. And you could go on and on and on. In the real estate game, there's manipulators who don't have people's best interests, who just want to get the coins as soon as possible and then get out of there, versus the people who genuinely enjoy giving people their first home, for example, and are giving them the ins and outs of real estate and investing. And they have genuine interest in their customers. So customers pick up on that. Most of them do. And one of the things I say every Thanksgiving is givers, what is it? The world is filled with givers and takers. Takers often eat better, but the givers always sleep better. And I just love that dynamic. So it kind of sums up everything. And that is my why, just trying to protect and encourage the innocent people not to be taken advantage of. And on the cover of, I'm going to show you the cover of my book real quick. Actually, I have it right here. So if you see the cover, you could see my reader, your audience is the dove. And the dove is innocent person, and that olive branch is their purpose. And you're carrying your purpose, but this beautiful serpent that I have there is trying to pull it down from its wall. So you have to literally rise above it. And I make it a circle because eventually, while you're climbing that mountain to get to your summit, you'll eventually fall off on your ass and end up in the valley. But Greg Laurie, a pastor out here in Southern California, says fruit grows in valleys and not on mountaintops. That's true. I love that because that's where the water is. That's where the moisture is. Yep. So when you're in the valley and you're humbled, all that fruit, all those flowers, all that beauty is actually the wisdom you're supposed to gather. That you've been humbled for a reason, and humility is the only path to wisdom. So I suggest nourish yourself with all that wisdom, stuff your pockets, gather some of those flowers for your wife, and resume your climb now with a better trajectory, knowing who the serpents are who are trying to pull you off, people who are trying to, hey, let's take the chairlift, or let's take the easy way out. No thanks, I'm going to just do the due diligence. And you're starting to navigate with more wisdom. So you're resuming your climb. You'll eventually fall off again, but that's why it's a circle, because it's a journey. Eventually you'll get up there. And these olives on the olive branch are symbolic of those fruits of wisdom. Carry them with you. And when you get close, you could see that serpent isn't as beautiful on the surface. Like most things pulling you off your wall are power, beautiful woman or man, whatever, a gun, you're elected HOA president, whatever those powerful things, you'll have a tendency towards corruption unless you humble yourself. So there's a lot of distractions out there, but the cure is humility. So you gather wisdom and you don't become a victim of your own success when you do try to eventually make it up to the summit. You just have to cognitively, deliberately remain humble.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I completely agree with that. Sort of, we talked about sort of the cycle of life, circle ups and downs. However,
Yeah,
the imagery, I think it kind of comes back to the same message overall. Is there's going to be hard times and good times, and learning from the hard, and that. And so the book title is "The Opposite is True." After, when people hear this and they want to reach out to you or they want to connect on the book, what's the best way? And we'll put we'll put all that in the show notes, but
yeah.
let them know how to get hold of you.
I think the best way is probably just my website. That's where everything is, and there's links there to if you want to buy the book and what format, and if you want to hear some podcasts, I have them in a podcast page. I'll put this one on there when it comes out, and that's efrendelgado.com. It's EFREN Delgado.com.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and like I said, we'll have that in the show notes. So the question I usually ask at the end is, what piece of advice would you give to someone who wants to get started? And a lot of times the sentence ends in started in real estate, but I'd love you to take that sort of in a different direction. In maybe it helps kids or young people, and they want to get started in this, towards this life of helping others, being kind, recognizing, the protection that needed for people. Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is the title of your podcast, Know Your Why. And
I did
I'll
not
back
tell him to say that, everyone. Just be clear.
and I'll back that up with this concept. Like I alluded to it before, but emotion and logic, they don't mix. They're like, I call them in the book, oil and water. They have two different densities. They're two different entities altogether. They do not mix. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. They're just different. We actually need both. But the logic and reasoning part is how you get things done. It's the how. It's organizing your closet. It's paying the bills. It's all the boring stuff. Um, but it's the things you need to get things done. But the emotional stuff is human energy. The most powerful energy in the world, I think, is human emotion, and that could go positively or negatively. So knowing your why is vital, but just know that any decision you make, big or small, there's a component of energy that is needed for fuel to make that decision. The implementation is the reason and logic part. So the huge analogy I'm always giving is on the tank. Tank is very powerful. It's armored, and on the top it's got the turret. The gun is the emotion. If it goes off without being pointed in the right direction, you could create a lot of damage for others and for yourself. So knowing your why is the assessment part. Assess your why, um, and then point the turret in the right direction, and then blast away, and then you'll really kill it in life. No pun intended. That knowing your why is my answer. And then a little life hack on happiness is when you pursue happiness, you're just going to be chasing the wind, chasing your tail. And the hack, what I'm suggesting is we want meaning in our lives. People are always seeking meaning, not happiness. And the hack is the more selfless you are, the more meaning you will find. The more selfish you are, the more villainous you will end up. And you'll also, and villains are depressed. The bad guys are not happy, despite their display. So I recommend if you're going into real estate, investing, movies, writing, business, being an entrepreneur, go for it. But just know what your why is, and that will get you there. And just remember, be as selfless as possible, and you'll stumble upon happiness.
I couldn't agree more. Obviously, I think knowing your why is important, but I think, the rest. I think just you will be happier, serving others, being selfless, just leading with kindness. I think it really just solves solves a lot of problems in general. So, Efren, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great chatting with you, and I appreciate everything that you shared. Encourage people to check out your book. Like I said, we'll have that in the show notes. But thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. It was great.
Yeah, and folks listening, I know you're going to love this episode. Please like, rate, and review the show so we can get more great guests like Efren. And thank you all for listening.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?